Well, look, I think we've waited long enough. We've got 4 or 5 people joining. I think more will join as we go along, but we're a few minutes in, so let's get started.
Yeah,
And
okay.
I think a lot of people will also want to listen to this in the recording for posterity. So thank you. First of all, a huge thanks to you, Philip, for joining us and taking the time out, and also a note of appreciation for your support of the club and what we're trying to do. It's been fantastic having you as one of our experts and founding members. Maybe just by way of introduction, you can introduce yourself through a little bit of your journey into the wine world, because it's not a stereotypical one. So how did you end up with 2 little letters, 2 little but important and meaningful letters after your name?
With a lot of blood, sweat, and toil and angst.
That's a different story, indeed.
Yes. No, look, it's great to be here, and I think Club dVIN's really interesting. It's got we have some great ideas, and it's at the forefront of things that are changing and moving in the wine world. My journey was, I used to work in finance, and I stopped my career, and I loved food and wine and collected a bit of wine, and there's always a history in the city in London of people collecting wines. It was all around you, and I was just always fascinated by it. Started buying and selling wine and trading wine, investing in wine. Then I started studying about it, wanted to learn more, and then got on the path to doing the Master of Wine. And that was a really fantastic and interesting journey. The people you met, the intensity of the course, the standards of the institute, the high bar they set, made it really intense. But it was fascinating, so I really enjoyed that. So bringing that sort of finance background and wine naturally led me to the investing side of wine. So that's really, I suppose, what I feel comfortable in or know most about.
And was it a welcoming community? Because I think, the Master of Wine has a certain reputation for being brutally difficult, but of course, we've all seen Somm, and while that's a different certification, you did get the sense of competition but camaraderie there. What is the MW community like, especially for a gentleman like yourself who came in kind of as more of a consumer of their services and then trying to become, I'm sure that wasn't necessarily the easiest way to enter.
Well, I would just say it's a body of, dare I say, quite eccentric people. There's a lot of characters in there. The Institute certainly used to be known as a lot more brutal because the office was only very small, and literally, I think in the early days, the papers, there was no study support or anything. You just got the exam, went to the exam, got the paper, and that was it, and then you were judged as such. But the Institute sort of grow. It's very welcoming, and it's the intensity and difficulty of passing that brings all the students together and makes them bond, because you need each other, you need to help each other, you're each other's resource. So when you were tasting probably 3 times a week, and people were organizing, Sunday mornings 9 o'clock, Saturday mornings, Wednesday nights. One of the ladies who ran the wine department at Hakkasan in London, she used to organize it every Wednesday. So just really intense, and this is going on for about 4 or 5 years. So you have to be quite
I could get myself up early Sunday morning to go taste wine at Hakkasan. I think that wouldn't require.
Well, when it's sort of £12 Sauvignon Blancs and a flight of neutral northern white Italian wines at 9 o'clock in the morning, that's a bit more dedication.
Tougher to match with your dumplings at 9 a.m. I'm sure.
Yeah, but there were great people on it, and sadly, a lot of people don't quite make the bar because it's quite brutal. You get timed out. You get 5 goes at the tasting exam, and if you fail on the 5th time, I think you're timed out for 10 years. So,
wow.
There's a bit of pressure on you on the 5th shot.
Do you know if anybody's ever come back after a 10-year hiatus?
I don't know that, actually. I don't know.
That would be an amazing feat and an interesting one to ask next time you guys.
And there are 3 or 4, aren't there? MSs and MWs. Late Gerard Basset was one of them. So they've gone. They brutalized themselves on both sides.
I'm sure. Yeah, there are a few indeed. That's insane.
Yes.
And speaking of community and wine, beyond obviously the MW crowd, what do you think I mean, community is obviously an important part of everybody's journey into wine and a reason why they stay. But how have you seen that changing in the last few years, both with technology, social media, but also so many bloggers, so many sources of information, winemakers bombarded by YouTube video makers and documentarists. And it feels like what used to be kind of a small handful of places to go get wine knowledge has now exploded. And I don't want to say everybody's an expert, but it's closer to that than the opposite, certainly, 20 years ago.
Well, there's a few things. I think one of them is you saw in a lot of businesses with the advent of COVID, technology came to the fore, Zoom, and people organizing tastings. Tamar did it in Tamar Coleraine. They send out the little sample bottles
Yeah.
so you can do a vertical tasting, do it on Zoom. So that changed things a little bit. That's how technology came in, got people more familiar with it. Back to the community side. Community is important. What's wine about? Wine's about sharing. It's about having fun. It's about enjoying the wine. In my view, not being too pompous about it, but enjoying nice wines. And community is key. And modern technology can make the community wider and broader, and people can reach out more. And that link may be we can really increase that link between the producer and the consumer, because there's always been 3 or 4 stages. And for most, consumers, they'll never meet the producer, they'll never see them. There might be some tutored tasting once in a big hall with 100 people or something. But I think producers are probably interested in what consumers really think, and vice versa. And to have that, build that interaction, I think is interesting, helpful, and it's fun to get to know where your wine's from, a little bit more about it. And the opportunity for learning and knowledge is expanding all the time.
Phenomenal. Absolutely.
But it is filtering that knowledge, isn't it? It's filtering that material to what's, good quality and useful and a good resource.
And I think that's the challenge. And what fits you. Like, I remember for myself, I would obviously read, a bunch of the reviews back in the day. And I really quickly filtered down and I became an avid reader of Clive Coates. Not because Clive is a this or that, or an MW has 16 titles, but more because I realized that his tastes matched very well with mine. Like, often I would read these descriptions and I'd be like, I don't know what you're drinking, but that wasn't in whatever was in my glass that when I had that wine. So, but with Clive, I it was like better than 60%. Like, I got it. I may not have agreed with his ratings, but at least I could sort of use his palate to calibrate whether I would like something or not like something. And I think the proliferation of, kind of both all different forms of media, but also different perspectives on wine. Like, if you want to do the Rosé All Day podcast and that's your thing, fine. So be it. If that matches what wine means to you, like, that proliferation on both sides has actually, I think, been good for the wine world. It may be more confusing for some, but I think, there's just a lot more different palettes that you can connect, or perspectives that you can connect with now.
And I think what's very important when you start out on your sort of wine journey, if I remember myself, you have quite fixed ideas about what you like. Okay, I like Bordeaux, and you're very fixed on it. But then you realize through your journey that your palate changes, your interests change, it morphs. And so there's a whole world out there. There's so much to learn. And it's not just fixed about the one thing. You might be interested in learning about something at one point in time, but it changes. It's not fixed. And it's worth remembering that. And that's what all this resource can provide.
Absolutely. And that for me, as well, as I've gone through my journey, especially Instagram has been a great way to connect with like-minded drinkers. And by seeing what else they're enjoying, it's also encouraged me to experiment a bit more, because, I went through the Bordeaux, red Bordeaux, white Burgundy, then discovering red Burgundy. And then I think, like many sort of geeks, now looking for the new thing, because at a certain point, you just want to be surprised and you want to discover new things. And for me, being an old fart, having yet another white Burgundy. I love it, but I'm fairly confident I know fairly well what I'm gonna get. Whereas, wow, that's a super interesting new Jura Chardonnay producer that's not reductive and super fresh. And I'm like, okay,
Well,
great. I'll go check that out.
with the advent of, the spreading of information, the technology in winemaking, which has improved a lot, the cleanliness in the wineries, and discovery of all these new regions, and as people are pushing the boundaries regionally to trying to find slightly cooler climates, whether it's going further down the coast of Chile or something, there are some great things to discover out there. And it's similar for me. I want to be wowed by that. Not too expensive bottle of wine. He's a great producer and the wine's fantastic, maybe even new grape varieties. But things like Gruner Veltliners from the Wachau, with a bit of age on them, they're fantastic. And there's so many things out there that can just really wow you. And that's the joy of the journey.
So I know climate change has been a big one. I won't go directly into that first. I want to pick your brain on a controversial one. Because a lot of younger consumers and a lot of places promoting great wines are associating themselves with natural wines, natural production. You see natural wine bars everywhere. You see exclusive or natural focused lists, etc. Can you talk about both sides of that equation? Because some people are like, mousy poop. That's not, wine that's built to last. It's a fad. Other people are like, fantastic. This is the old way. Respect for, the purity of the craft of
I
the
would
raw
argue
material.
for me, the reality is the middle ground. The wines still need to be well made. They need to have longevity. I sort of respect the movement, and depends how far down the natural wine movement you're talking about, sort of organic, or is it free of all SO2. Stylistically there are certain style, I think some are really good, but I do wince sometimes if I go somewhere and the whole wine list is natural wines. I just think, I hope there's something nice in here. I hope there's something good.
I'll be honest, if you'd asked me that question like 2-3 years ago, I probably would have been snarkier in my answer than now. And I found natural wines that I love. I found natural wines that I absolutely do not. And the same thing with wines made any other way. I do fundamentally believe that I wonder whether a lot of them will last. And I don't cellar a lot of natural wines.
Well, some of them, some of them may
go.
last because they're made in that oxidative style, so they're not necessarily going to oxidize. I'm not going to profess to be an expert on that field, but again, like you, there are some good ones out there.
We just got a question then saying, how do we know which natural wines to trust? The answer is you don't. Even like producers that I love, the wine can vary wildly from vintage to vintage and then with age. But as always, I would say my advice would be, and I'd love to hear Philip's take on this, but I would say pick the producer before you pick the wine. And I've discovered great wines from producers, but I tend to focus more on producers that I know that I like and that I find trustworthy, rather than saying, oh, that's a natural Gruner. I'll
maybe producer, maybe region, maybe grape variety, if you like all those. And then maybe sort of reviews, reading good people like Jancis Robinson, reading their reviews about them and sort of trying to explore from there. But it's a journey you'll have to go on yourself in a way.
So what's the standout change for you? I mean, we can talk about younger consumers and their tastes. We can talk about prices exploding and wine becoming, much harder to access, certainly fine wine, and allocations and that whole game. We can talk about, and I do at some point want to talk about the sour grapes problem. But for you personally, both in your own wine journey, but also professionally as someone who advises clients, what's been the most kind of fundamental, substantive shift in the wine world in the last 3 to 5 years?
I think one of the things is so those wines where supply is very limited is where you've seen the real explosion in price. So if we look at Bordeaux, produces a lot of wine. They're big producers. So prices have risen, but they're not gone stratospheric compared to what they were. But obviously those Burgundies and some of the Piedmont producers, that's been one of the big changes. And those wines, in a sense, are getting out of the reach of drinking, because everyone's got some sort of bar that they'll go up to, whether it's $30, $80, $500, whatever your bar is. There's somewhere where you're sort of comfortable. And a number of them are going away from that. And again, the allocation problem as they get skinnier and skinnier.
Yeah, and that's changed who I think feels like they can even get into the wine world, right? Like, on the one hand, I hate the snobbery like you, and I hate that it's becoming a thing for only the truly, truly wealthy, because it's also part of the reason for, I mean, other than just disliking snobbery, part of the reason why that bugs me is that so many of the people in the wine world, in the trade, et cetera, don't have that kind of money. And,
No,
have sort of it's not like working at the Rolls-Royce dealer when, you can go drive it when you want, even if you can't own it. It's really becoming like you can have a sip when you're pouring it for somebody else, which starts to become really just not right. That doesn't sit well with me.
It's a bit the sort of gated community
yes
thing to it, isn't it? And it's a shame, but there's an inevitability about it. There's only so much of it. People desire it. The world gets wealthier. The stock markets go up. They have a wealth effect, and money piles in. And I don't know if Mark Zuckerberg likes drinking DRC. He can afford to. He can have it every night if he likes, and that's where it goes.
Bathe in it. But the flip side of that, I think, and I think this is in a way part of what the natural wine movement was about, was kind of saying, down with your snobbery, right? And the other part, obviously, of the snobbery is that people feel like there's this exclusivity on multiple dimensions. It's expensive. You have to know an incredible amount and all that nonsense around it. Versus, I think a lot of what, consumers coming into wine, they have different values. And I think that snobbery turns off a lot of,
for sure, and they
consumers.
should also be reassured by the fact that if you take one of the very fashionable, expensive producers, and you take a vertical 10 vintages of his wine and you tasted them blind, I'm pretty sure that a number of those vintages will not be great, and they will be nowhere near worth the price tag that they charge. And so that price quality ratio just doesn't really exist, but people buy it. And that's the blind tasting element is where it really shows. And there are so many other good producers, especially if you go in the good years, who will beat those wines on a sort of purely blind quality sense. So you don't need to fall into that trap. And arguably, people who fall into it, well, that's sort of their issue. I mean, some of the wines are phenomenal. The good years and the great producers, they're there for a reason.
Oh, absolutely. But one of the things I hate most is that a new winemaker will come in, start making amazing wines. A winery will gain reputation, and then all the old wines will explode in price as well. They had nothing to do with each other. What are But
no. There's definitely there's something wrong in the sort of price and vintage and of top wines. There should be much more variation. But there isn't, because you're paying for a brand and a fashion, and it sort of changes the scope of it. But if you were building a cellar for someone who really likes wines, you would pick very selectively.
Yeah, so let's shift gears there, because that's something I definitely wanted to talk to you about, and it's linked to our previous point, which was about the prices and access. Let's talk about wine as an investment, because the prices have exploded, allocations are tough. How do you, and by the way, you also have to enjoy this stuff at some point. So you can't just have the price tag as your model, or the ROI as your model. I guess you could, but in theory, you should be balancing those things out, as I assume a lot of your clients do. How would you advise someone coming to you thinking about investment grade wine?
Well,
Balancing enjoyment and all the factors that we just talked about.
You need to decide, well, the client needs to decide at the start, why are they doing this? Why are they investing in wine? Is it, and it can come from a few different angles. So it could be, I'm a pure capitalist, I just want to make money, okay? That's all I'm interested in. It could be somebody who says, well, I really like these wines, they're a bit expensive, but if I can buy 10 cases, and I can keep it for 5-10 years, I can sell 5 or 7 of them, and I get the other 3 or 4 for free as they roll up in value. There's that side to come from it as well. So I think the important thing is decide why you're buying this wine. Or are you buying it because you think you'll only get it at the start on the allocation or whatever? You want to know where it's stored. You want to protect the provenance and know all about it. And you want to enjoy it yourself in 10 years' time and have a bottle every year or two. So it depends what your starting point on that journey is, and therefore depends what decisions you make. And the wine work, it used to be a lot less complex, because before there were a lot more sort of wine funds and investors. Wine used to be sold, it used to naturally diminish in supply as it was drunk, and it would generally appreciate quite smoothly. And so it made a lot of sense just to, buy your 10 cases. Is how I started. I thought, if I buy 10 and I can sell 5 or 6 and I get the other 4 much cheaper or for free, I can start building a nice cellar. And then everything got really disjointed in the sort of, I think it's like 2007 to 2011. So much money came flooding in, and it broke through all the relationships, and it became a very different beast. And then you had the whole sort of, it wasn't a bubble, but the prices peaking in Bordeaux in 2011. It all went very stratospheric and fell to the earth afterwards. So it's about what you're trying to achieve, and then it's about setting out that strategy to achieve what you want to.
So let's say I'm a crypto investor. I have money, but I have an interest in wine, but I want to learn, and I'm more interested in the experiences and then thinking about wine as an asset fundamentally. What's kind of the minimum commitment I need to start thinking about in terms of number of cases I need to buy, how much I need to taste to really kind of figure out what I like and don't like, and whether I, should be visiting all this stuff, or
I think it comes
should I
down
just
to
go and visit and hey, I like champagne. Philip and a bunch of people are going to organize let's go. What would you advise someone like that?
I think it comes back to an earlier point. We were talking about how your taste will change as well. So I would argue, don't dive in feet first and go all in and buy 100 cases of Bollinger because you love it, because you probably get bored of it after a while. So explore as much as you can. Go to tastings, go to producer dinners, go to the wine merchants tasting. I don't know what so much happens in the States, but in London every year we have the Bordeaux tastings, you have the Burgundy tastings. Start to get to know, talk to people, and if there's something you like and a style, buy a few cases and just keep building and exploring and going on that journey, and you'll learn more. And as I say, as you start to learn what you like, and also when you like to drink that wine, because I remember buying lots of 2005 Burgundies, and they took years to come round, years and years. And ironically, that's one of the best vintages for decades. And with Burgundy side, with Bordeaux, you have these great vintages, but they take so long to come around sometimes. It's the lesser vintages that actually give you more drinking pleasure. Yeah. And they're half the price. So and
turn out to be pretty damn good vintages anyway, because Bordeaux's,
I remember they
last a shockingly long time. So
they threw out loads of the 97s really cheap back in about must have been
97.
About in 99, and I can't remember when it was, 98, 99. The merchants in London were throwing away these cases almost, like £200 a case, £250 a case from Monroe's, Pichon Baron, etc. And they were great drinkers over the next 10, 15 years. They were, some of the wines were a little bit light and a bit thin, but some of them were really good. And it was
Yeah, I
Great
don't think you
pleasure.
can accuse Monrose of being light and thin in any
No,
given vintage. So yeah,
no.
absolutely.
But it's
But
those little
that's what's,
pockets.
I mean, but that's what's intimidating, right? Like you and I can say this because, I don't even want to think about how many bottles between us we've had of Monrose, but somebody who's never heard of Monrose would be like, how the hell do I figure that out? And that's a little bit part of why we set this up, right? Like I
Just
want
about
people
to
like you
say,
on, yeah,
be a
yeah,
member of a club and interact and ask those questions. And you'll find within the club membership, there'll be some people who know so much. There'll be some people, sort of our age, old farts. They don't have any qualifications in wine or anything, but they'll love an area and they'll be super knowledgeable. They know so much more than I do about specific producers and all kinds of stuff. There's a wealth of information out there. And I think the club can help bring all that together.
I think that's a really important thing you just said, because I mean you've got the title, you've got the experience, you do this for a living, but I think it's important for people to know that no matter who the hell you are, there's somebody who's deeper and
Oh,
than you are in any given place. And I learn stuff even when I go to my favorite producers that I've visited dozens of times. I will learn something new every time there. And I'm not even half of an expert, much less an MW. So I love, for me, that's the fascinating thing about community around wine, because you can go as deep as you want. And I've had people who know nothing about wine come with me to their first visit to a winery ever and just walk away like I had no idea, and just the smiles on their faces like I had no idea the richness of this world. And that's kind of, for me, that's the important thing. If I can unlock that feeling for a few dozen people, that's kind of the magic.
I think you can. If people start with a certain degree of curiosity and are happy to be led on a journey, then it's there. And there's so much resource and so much resource the club can provide. That people can have that experience, and then the wheel starts turning.
I know you've only got a few minutes. You have to leave in about 9 minutes. So one, I'll give a shout out to the crowd to say, pop your questions in, because Philip doesn't have a lot of time. He's got to jump 20 till. But I wanted to switch sides. I want to flip that around. We talked about the positive side of investment and the whole entry into the wine world. Let's talk a little bit about the authenticity problem, the sour grapes problem for a minute, because I think that's also scared a lot of people off. I love sour grapes. I think it was brilliant and kind of gave a great eye-opening sort of look into the problem of counterfeiting and how the system actually is entirely, through no one's fault, is engineered to incentivize bringing amazing bottles to market and not to scratch too hard at whether they're authentic or not. But then you and I have both, and I want to go back to your comment on blind tasting. You and I have both been to tastings, I'm sure, where somebody's pulled a Romanée Conti and we've been like, this is off, this is terrible. And everybody, whoa, Romanée Conti, amazing, changed my life. And drank stuff blind where amazing wines were in the lineup, and we love the dark horse too.
You must be going to much better tastings than I do. I can assure you. But what I
arguably
think
there's
there's an interesting anecdote which I heard, which I think is true. So somebody buys a really old Burgundy from like maybe the 1930s or 40s, and it's still, the fruit's still good in it today, and think, wow, that's amazing. That's a really good wine. It's such structure. Well, it might be full of Algerian wine from the old French colonies, because when they had those really thin vintages in Burgundy, they probably blended it. I don't know what's in there, Cab Sav or whatever they grew in Algeria. And that's a big authenticity problem, but not one you can resolve easily. I mean, I think provenance is key. It's where you buy it from, and obviously, if you buy en primeur, and it goes into your, like in the UK, we have the bonded storage accounts, which is a good system, which is a sort of semi sort of safe sort of setup and system. There are holes in it. You could find holes in it quite easily. However, it's been in the bonded system. So if you've had ownership of the wine the whole time, then great. But if it's been from if you can track it, and it's, you know, you often saw these great collections wines go over to the States, and about what was it, 5-8 years ago, they're all being sold in Hong Kong. Then they're going out to Asia, then they're coming back. Do you want to buy that wine? It's like,
I love seeing RC second time around the auction in Asia with Wildman labels on it, and you're just like, yeah, but really?
I remember one of the funniest I saw was a bottle of, it was years ago, it was before I was really into wines. It must have been in that 2000, I was into wine, it was in 2003, 4. And I saw a bottle of Haute Brion in a 7-Eleven in Angkor Wat. And I really remarked at the bottle. I didn't know at that stage it had a different shaped bottle. I thought, well, that must be fake because the bottle's a different shape. But the bottle is a different shape.
Has been for a good while. Yeah, that's a funny one. There were so many jokes going around right after Rudy Kurniawan was released with like Romane Conti misspelled on the and just these fantastic like obviously fakes that were just laughable.
Yeah, I mean, look, high prices will always attract fakes, won't they? Sadly. But it's that provenance thing, and it's just provenance and knowing the history and the chain and where it's been. And hopefully, and this is where blockchain can come in, and I'm no expert on that. If the wine doesn't actually have to move and it can just stay in its warehouse in France or London or wherever and change ownership, but actually stay in the same, you know, cage, that solves a lot of problems.
Yeah. And I think knowing to whom it was sold and how they would have cared for it, you know, over time, you will start to develop a reputation for reliability. You will start to develop a reputation. If you're a trader, someone who does exactly what you said, you know, buy 10 cases, keep 5, sell 5. If you're buying those from super reliable sources and people are it becomes like a rating system with the traceability attached to it, not just out of nowhere, like, hey, this is a 5-star seller because I love, you know, I've always gotten good stuff from them. If I can go back to you and I know that it all came en primeur, either 1 step or 2 degrees of separation, and you can provide proof of all that, that becomes, I think, very compelling for people who have concerns. And I think everybody does at these price tags.
And what you'll see is you'll just see different. You'll see the same wine trade at different prices. You know, it'll have. It's like a credit thing, isn't it? Really.
Yeah,
it's you know, sort of differentiation in price. If it's from, you know, it's like when they release later vintages from one of the Bordeaux chateaux, they always trade at a premium because it's come from the chateau.
As they should. It's been had the same.
I think there's a couple of interesting questions come in here.
Yeah, we definitely need to take those. And I know we've only got a few minutes. One's for me. I'll take the NFT one, and then you can think about the benefits for winemakers one while I'm answering. I think the question was, how can we prevent the risk that introducing NFTs to fine wines will create even more financial speculation? I think that's a great question. And I think that it will do exactly what Philip said. I don't think it will drive the entire market, but I think it will put high degree of trust, great provenance wines more clearly at the top of the pecking order and create a more clear rationale for why that value for provenance X should be whatever it is. The analogy I always use, which isn't a flattering one, I know, is to the secondhand car market. Mileage is a calculus for value. Same car, same year, same model year. You give 10 different mileages or kilometerages, depending on where in the world you are, you will know exactly why it's worth that. Because the likelihood is that that amount of its life has been beaten out of it or used out of it. It's the same thing with the provenance. You'll know what a 2-step away from primeur been moved twice wine versus a been moved once wine versus a hasn't been moved since release wine. You'll know exactly what those are worth to consumers. And I think it will be more about transparency than it will be about driving even more acceleration. I don't think more acceleration is really possible, but I'm sure somebody's going to quote me on that, and I'll look like one of those idiots who said Bitcoin will never be anything $45,000 ago. So yeah. Philip, do you want to take?
Yes, I was
benefits for
just
the
typing
winemaker?
it, but I'll speak it because it'll be quicker. I think benefits for winemakers, we talked on it earlier, is that closer link between consumer and producer. A lot of winemakers are really curious, even the top ones like DRC, they want to know who's drinking it. And they don't necessarily want it always traded around everywhere. So there's an element potentially of control and transparency. I think the improvement in the relationship between consumer and producer is good. The sort of feedback thing, what people are enjoying it with, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's helpful. I think Behdad and they've got some ideas about how winemakers can come into the club and, you know, these sort of sales direct to consumers. And that's really interesting. So I hope that it increases the conversation and brings the two parties closer. And at the end of the day, they're the two that matter, and not necessarily all the layers in between of merchants, negotiations, and etc. Who all take a little margin out of it, or not maybe little margin, but a margin, shall we say?
I was actually really encouraged by your earlier statement in the conversation, Philip, that the way that the pandemic changed things was through showing that value of the direct relationships in a way that never would have happened or would have taken years and years to happen through the natural evolution. And what we really want to do is to create the platform, which is by and for the winemakers and wine lovers. So really evolve it to where they see and get the value. And I'm super excited to explore it. We have a bunch of ideas, and there's a bunch of stuff that we have gotten a lot of great affirmation from winemakers and wine lovers back that we're confident will work. But I'm sure there's 10 cool things that we'll figure out over the next few years as this thing scales, which we don't know, but are going to
absolutely the evolution. And people are still learning, aren't they, about those interactions and how they're best managed, and, you know, the benefits to everyone. So
absolutely.
So I'm
Philip,
gonna,
I don't want to cut us short, but I do want to be respectful of your time. You're already 1 minute over your.
No, I'm just in a rush. I do apologise.
No, not
but
at all.
It leaves plenty of subject matter for the future.
Absolutely. Thank you again so much for the time, Philip.
Yeah, thank you to everyone for dialing in and suffering me for half an hour.
It was good fun. Thanks, and we'll do this again soon.
All right. Thanks, Behdad.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Cheers.